yeah, we're live. Another episode of The Oddest Couple. I'm Felix alongside John Alite and our guest today. But first, we want to remind you, please subscribe to our channel if you haven't done so already. Like, comment down on this video. I don't know. Is there anything else you want to promote? We have our Legacy 11 vodka.
Legacy 11 vodka that's distilled 11 times, sugar-free, gluten-free. And it's excellent vodka. You got to try it. It's out in every state, 39 states actually. Distributing in Florida right now.
And you can, we'll put the website in the description of our video. We're very excited about getting it into a lot of bars and clubs here once we figure out the New York situation. But it's going to be really in every single state.
Yeah, it's great vodka. I'm a vodka drinker, and it's filtered also 11 times for people that are.
I think 11 times filtered, 11 times distilled, sugar-free, and gluten-free, I believe.
Yes.
Amazing. Our guest today, Isabel, thank you for coming in. John, I briefly got a little bit of background on you, and John has spoken very highly of you. You brought your book with us today. Do you mind, just for the viewers and listeners out there, to give us a little bit of background info on who you are, what you do, and what Overture of Hope is about?
So I'm a reporter for the New York Post. I've been there for 15 years. I'm an investigative reporter, and I usually cover political corruption. So I've done a lot of work on corrupt politicians in New York City. Before that, I was based in Brazil for a number of newspapers, including the Globe and Mail, the Canadian national paper. I'm from Canada, so that was my first job. And I was sent there when I was 25. And my first big story was covering Pablo Escobar. So, and you've seen Narcos, and when I saw Narcos, I thought, gee, it was a lot worse than what Narcos depicted. And I just have to tell you a story that is, something I've always remembered, is that on Friday nights, I would go to the public hospital in Medellin, and they, at the time, this small city of like 1 million people had 50,000 homicides, so at the time of Pablo Escobar. And when I went on Friday nights, there would be these taxis screeching to a halt outside and these like bleeding drug traffickers in the back seat. So there were no more ambulances. They came in the taxis, and they had run out of orderlies at the hospital, so that the people who were bringing them in were the Medellin Boy and Girl Scout troops. And these were kids who were like 10 years old and 11 years old, and they were bringing these guys out of the back seats of the cabs and onto stretchers. So this is like my first exposure to, I guess, journalism in a way. I mean, it was real trial by fire, and I was based in Medellin for quite a long time, but I've also written several books. My latest book, which is my 7th book, is Overture of Hope. And it's a true story about two sisters who became opera fans in the 1920s and the 1930s in England. And they befriended some of the biggest divas and conductors of their day, including a man named Clemens Krauss, who was Hitler's favorite conductor. So having said that, he asked them to help him save Jewish musicians, and they did.
Saved 28 of them.
Yeah, they saved a bunch of people just by going to, under the pretext of going to opera performances in the Third Reich. So this is before the war had actually started. They go ostensibly for opera, and they smuggle back the assets of the people that they're trying to save. Among the assets are jewelry. So they just come back plastered with jewelry on their cheap Marks and Spencer dresses, under the noses of the border guards. This is one of the things that they did. So
it's really an incredible story. I mean, I read some of it, and then you sent me some other material. I read some of that, and I mean, it's really incredible what you uncovered and wrote, and what they did is amazing.
So the reason I wanted to tell this story is because they were pretty ordinary. These two ordinary civil servant clerks who were given this chance to help in a very bad situation, and they didn't hesitate. They just did what they could.
Now, a lot. I have a lot of questions, but I kind of want to start more on the Medellin Pablo Escobar side. You obviously know his past. I guess first, how are you guys connected? And then secondly, I guess you've covered now organized crime and criminals, drugs, politicians. What were your first impressions of John when you first heard his story?
Actually, I was delighted to know that he lived in Rio de Janeiro because fala português, and he speaks Portuguese. So, and I wanted to ask you about that because I was sort of fascinated with that you chose Rio to go to. And is it because there was no extradition between Brazil and?
Yeah, initially it wasn't, and the bank robber from London.
I interviewed him.
Yeah. Oh, did you?
Yeah.
We have a lot of connection because she just did a huge story on Senator Menendez and him being arrested with his girlfriend, and my involvement with them and the attorney. And so I'm in the middle of that story, and this is how we started talking. And actually, it was it was page 16 and 17 was 2 full pages on what you wrote about.
Yeah, Senator Menendez. I've been covering Senator Menendez for the last 10 years. So I was among the first who did the previous indictment where he was indicted for bribery along with Solomon Melgen, who was a Palm Beach doctor, who he helped by setting up. Melgen also had this like import-export business and controlled the ports in the Dominican Republic. So allegedly, Menendez got all these luxurious trips to various places in the Dominican Republic in exchange for preventing the U.S. government from interfering with this Dominican side hustle that this eye doctor had. And also sort of helping the doctor not, or ostensibly helping the doctor not get into trouble for all of the Medicaid fraud that he was later convicted of.
And just to clarify, I believe the jury pool came back 10 to convict, 2 to quit. So we had a hung jury, basically.
Exactly.
They changed the law of exactly what bribery was, pertaining to senators and government officials. So we kind of squeaked through.
Yeah, Menendez was acquitted. Yeah.
But whether you believe he's guilty or not is one thing. But the arrogance of getting involved again and being arrested on new charges now that she just covered, that Isabella just covered, is, to me, shows the state of our government. That doesn't matter what side of the aisle, they're arrogant enough to believe they can do what they want and disregard this country and the citizens of this country. And I think they should be charged more with treason than what they're being charged with. I just think they're selling out our country.
Well, he's innocent until proven guilty, right? But what's fascinating in this particular case is like the alleged brazen corruption that we're looking at. Gold bars that are in his home, also
$500,000
in cash that he claims that he took out every year from his bank in cash because he didn't trust the banks. And my dad was sort of like that too, sort of very old school Portuguese. Like he had cash at home in a safe. So I sort of, to some extent that may be true. But if he did do that, I would assume that he has documentation to back it all up. And that's one of the questions I have. Like if he did say that, and he did say that in a press conference last week, I'm assuming that he has the documentation that he has every time that he took out several $1,000s out of his savings account.
What have you found to be the common denominator, common theme behind a lot of corruption amongst politicians over the years?
So one of the, so we're talking about influence peddling or alleged influence peddling, but also one of the things that I found is that a lot of them set up or become part of these nonprofits, these 501c3s, in which they actually use them to like favor people that they want to favor and launder money through them, because you don't pay tax with a nonprofit. I think there's a lot of lax oversight with nonprofits. Many years ago, we reported on various state senators using a nonprofit, and they claimed they raised all this money for the Katrina, for Katrina in the South, and in fact, none of that money went out to Katrina victims, and we documented that. So a lot of what we do is just follow the money as best as we can.
And
And
so my involvement is my lawyer, Doug Anton, I believe you know who he is, was my entertainment lawyer, also handled some of my personal matters and criminal matters for my family and my children. Was the fiance. She was the fiance of his. And we were in each other's company for several years while they were together. And so I was in the midst of what was going on, or on my view, what was going on between the senator, my lawyer, his wife, became his wife, Nadine, and our friendship. One of the things was that hasn't really surfaced that much is the intimidation that he used against my attorney.
Oh, we wrote about it.
Yeah, but it hasn't come out criminally about, because if this was a mob case, say, they would have tried to entangle us into some sort of RICO, a federal indictment of RICO, which I'm surprised that you're not seeing more of this with the government officials, because they're being, the ones that are being accused are involved with more than two people in a criminal enterprise, because that's what it is if they're found guilty.
Mm-hmm. What can you describe? Sorry to ask, but can you describe some of the what you're saying that he used as intimidation?
Well, there was police were summoned to my lawyer's office and threatened him with different things that could happen to him. Told him that he's been reported by the senator, and that the senator made certain claims against him, that he was beaten up or intimidating his girlfriend, his now wife, at the time. And I was in the middle of those, where my attorney was definitely intimidated of the senator and was calling me at all hours of the night to come meet him, because he was scared to get into his car. He was afraid to go pick up Nadine, because he was the boyfriend of Nadine originally. And the senator stepped in the picture. Now, from what I understand, he said they met at a certain year, which is not true. They met years prior, and they had some sort of friendship. I believe Nadine was manipulated by the senator. I believe that she was under the belief that because he's a senator, naive or whatever you want to call it, that she could do whatever he asked her to do, and it's not a problem. She didn't question it. And yeah, she probably was used to the power and became used to the money and maybe turned a blind eye to it and wanted to believe whatever the senator was doing. But at the same time, my attorney was definitely afraid, because he was parking his car at his back entrance, right at the front door of the back entrance, because he didn't want to walk through the parking lot. He also called me when he had some sort of confrontation with the senator and one of his security. I don't know if it's Secret Service or personal security. And I told him, don't get out of the car. So they'll know nothing could be confused as him threatening somebody and him getting shot. So there was things that were being done, and him calling me at all hours, can you come meet me here? Can you come meet me there? Can you wait till I pick up Nadine, sit on the corner in another car, make sure that nobody comes? And that went on for a while. That wasn't like a weekly thing. I think at one point, Doug just said, I had enough of this, and then walked away from the relationship. And Nadine, on our part, wasn't sure which one she really wanted to be with, and it was a back and forth, and my attorney did give her a ring also. And I don't know of him ever having a past history of any kind of violence with anybody. So I didn't buy that. I never seen my attorney, but always kind of stayed subdued, soft-spoken, very intelligent. So I didn't buy it. And, who knows? I wasn't there during those threats. I just know the action of my attorney was constantly calling me at all hours to meet him, because he was asking me to socialize more with them, because he was worried about running into somebody or somebody trying to hurt him. And so there's a lot to it.
Now I'm very curious about your perception of John's life. having, followed Escobar's life for a long time, was there any initial kind of hesitation when you first were introduced to John and his past?
No, I mean, when we started talking, I thought John was very articulate and was straight ahead. Like there was no, it was completely transparent, and there was no hedging. There was no, he just told it like it was, which was actually quite refreshing. So and also the instincts that you have in assessing people and assessing, you know more than anybody. You know how to read people in a way that maybe other people don't. Like you have a good street sense, if I can put it that way.
Yeah. I mean, listen, you live in a life of gangsters. So the way you intimidate or extort somebody or threaten to hurt somebody was the same actions that my attorney Doug was accusing him of doing to him. So this was basic playbook of a gangster that would talk like this, and you're taking that threat to an edge, but it's really the way you're saying it isn't a threat, but you get it. It's, in other words, it's very dangerous in the street. There's ways of saying it. When you go out to your car one night, you can't get robbed or hurt. It happens to a lot of people. You can't get killed. These aren't direct threats, but they're threats, and the message is getting across. It's a good idea to stay away from Nadine. She doesn't want anything to do with you, and I wouldn't want something to happen to either one of you if something happens to her, or if she's physically harmed, or if she's physically threatened. And he would say, I didn't threaten anybody, I didn't hurt anybody, but he would use those words, and I know why he was using those words, and I had the discussion with Doug. I go, because if somebody shoots you one day, they're going to say you went towards her, even though you're not doing those things. But now they have a response by his security that happens to be there. That's why I told them, do not get out of your car. When you're going to pick her up, let her walk into your car. Do not have a confrontation, because they can say that you threaten. You can say anything. They'll kill you, and he's a powerful senator. So these are some of the things that I was worried about when Doug was conveying to me what's going on. Now, Doug's not a guy that doesn't have a lot of clients. He handled R. Kelly with his cases. I brought him Sammy Gavano and Carol Gavano. I brought him, and Kim D actually brought him to me from the Housewives. So he's in the entertainment field, but he's really not in the criminal field. He got involved with us, and he knows us in our new lives, but not in the mob world. And the intimidation part of intimidating Doug, he was scared. So how this comes out, how this plays out, I don't know if they're calling him in as a witness or testimony. I'm not sure. But the actions of these kind of threats, this is gangster 101 that was being used against him, and really why he walked away from her, because he didn't want to walk away from his girlfriend. He loved her, and she was very confused. And on her behalf, I've always liked her. So I just thought she was manipulated by him. And that's my personal opinion. People say, oh, you're nuts. And everybody's going to have their opinion. But I know her, and I know her children. And I told you, she raised her children very well. They're good kids. They went to school, very educated, polite. I never knew her to do anything wrong.
And she's very educated. She's got an MA in International Relations from NYU.
Yeah, she speaks Arabic. She speaks French fluently. She dealt with one of my producers that was born in France, and he's Albanian. Well, he's Albanian, but he lived in France. He speaks fluent French, and she carried a conversation with him. And I asked him afterwards. He goes, she speaks a beautiful French, that she's not so very articulate in many languages. So, people talk because she dresses a little promiscuous the way she dresses, and listen, everybody can dress the way they want. That doesn't mean that she's
We've
doing
lived in Rio. We've lived in Rio.
we lived in Rio, right.
We know what promiscuous looks like. That's not promiscuous.
No.
I don't think so. It's kind of conservative for Rio.
Yeah.
One of the things that John and I have spoken about on our show is a lot of the similarities that the politicians and government officials have with the mafia and using really mob tactics at the end of the day. John can talk about that, but I'm curious, do you find that same kind of analysis that a lot of
when dealing with politicians?
Yeah.
I mean, not really. Like with me, it's always like the spin, and they're there's like a wall of public relations and spokespeople. Like you often never get to the person that you want to talk to. And when they have, I usually get things like, I'm being racist if I question why the mayor's closest advisor is like this, alleged Chinese party operative. Like I get, oh, well, I get those kinds of things, like those kinds of responses, but I never really see that other side. Like I haven't been in a situation where anybody's really, really threatened me. But I guess on a, I guess in different situations.
Yeah, but I think my tactics wouldn't necessarily just be threats, right? Like you talk about, and you've talked about on past shows, like whether it's intimidation or some
it's very intimidating if you're an attorney and you have Capitol Police come to your office and they can be as polite as you want. It just accomplished what you wanted. It was like me sending 2 guys to somebody. You don't got to hurt them. It accomplishes exactly what they want, the intimidation factor. And that's what went on. But the problem I have with politicians compared to the gangsters, and I don't speak highly about gangsters at all. I changed my life. I talk against them. They're pro-America. These guys seem to, the ones that are being accused, to be selling out the country. And all the veterans that risked their lives and died for this country, here's the problem. Where's the thinking mechanism when they don't believe in a country? They're supposed to be looking out for the citizens of the country. I have a problem with it, no different than I spoke about earlier off camera. When you have Trudeau giving a standing ovation with Zelensky for a Nazi warrior at Parliament in Canada, and people, if me and you ever did that, and you're French Jew, right? My grandson's Jewish, my daughter's in-laws are Jewish, and I'm, people know that, it's when you wrote this book, and I want to say it again for people to get it, Overture of Hope is, it's incredible what happened in history, that in 2023, after all the deaths, the murder, the mayhem, the suffering, that somebody could give a standing ovation for a Nazi soldier. To me, it's just, I can't fathom how that is. And they make it very easy, and I said it all earlier, for Putin to talk the way he does about Zelensky and the war that's going on when they're just laying it up for him, because nobody could defend that. There's no possible defense to a animal life guy that was involved with the Nazi regime, that was torturing and killing children, elderly women, and they're standing ovation for him at 2023. There is no explanation for that. So when I see some of this go on with these governments, you got to say to yourself, who do you really trust? Who's the real gangsters here? Who's really? It's just, to me, it's incredible.
That's a good point. I think, though, the Speaker of the House ended up resigning over that.
Yes.
Right? But I think Trudeau also apologized, but I'm not even sure why that happened. Did they just get the guy's name wrong? And that's sort of inexcusable to have him before, Canada's Parliament and applaud him as, as like a hero, when in fact, and the Ukrainian Nazis were among the worst, because Ukraine had some of the worst massacres of people. Baba Yar is one, and several others where they just lined up Jews and shot them to death and put them in a pit. There's horrible stories that came out of Ukraine. So to sort of get that wrong is just incredibly embarrassing. Worse than embarrassing.
Yeah, there is no excuse for whatever they try to come out with. Some sort of explanation for what they did. There is none. There's nothing possibly there. And Trudeau has made some comments about Cuba and his communism and some of these dictatorships. So, he said the secrets out loud, and so I don't think there is any way he can backstep this.
And Justin Trudeau's father, of course, was Pierre Trudeau, who was very close to Fidel Castro. Yes. So he grew up around that. Mm-hmm. And Cuba, for Canadians, it's always been really interesting, the love affair with Cuba. And I think it's because Castro and everybody in the Cuban government was so anti-American. And in a way, Canadians sort of embraced that anti-American posture. We're Canada, we're not the U.S. I traveled to Cuba a lot. Like when I was living in Canada, that was one of the areas I covered. And it was always very sad countries, totally repressive. People couldn't say anything. People begging me for medications. The people I interviewed.
We have so much in common because when I got in trouble, I ran to Cuba, and I funneled my money through Canadian banks into Cuba because of this. Yeah, and I lived in Miramar and in Havana, and I seen that, and then later on, to answer your question, you said earlier, is what made me go into
Brazil.
Brazil was because of the extradition thing that later on changed, but also I had a cousin that was there and married to an attorney, so I had some connection there, where I would stay 5-6 hours away from where they lived. And I had some things, communication to my family that way.
But how did the Cuban government react to you coming?
I went in through Cayman Islands.
Okay.
And I flew back and forth. It was 45 minutes. And I went in I had several passports. And I lived with a political family there that actually secretly was against that government. But they were a political family that were helping me to try to get citizenship in Cuba. Actually, at the time, they didn't help me. They got it for me, and it would have cost me $200,000.
Wow!
And I could have stayed. So they didn't have a problem. They stamped the inside of my passport. They didn't stamp the passport itself. They put the piece of paper in it, and I went back and forth at will, actually, from Cayman, and they helped me. I lived in a beautiful house.
Oh,
some of those old.
Yeah, beautiful. Yeah. The old Embassy Row there.
I mean, the people of Cuba are so friendly. They're great. You can walk in the street. It's safe. But they suffer, like you said. They have completely nothing. And when I would come back and forth, I'd try to sneak in computers and different things to give them. And you couldn't have cable television. And they'd put the dish and they'd hide the dish. And once in a while, police would come around and check. And if you get caught, you're being jailed and probably hurt. So they took some big chances, and the women would walk in the street and they're harassed as prostitutes. And so there's a lot of things that go on, with the country that people don't talk about. But the people themselves are great, very friendly, very family-oriented, very polite. And I used to use a lot of those people, and I would send them money. I believe they were allowed 100 a year, maybe 200 tops as gifts. And then I'd use different people to keep sending my money over through my banking systems, and I'd give them some money because they only got $20 a month. So I would bring 10 people with me, say, and give them all.
They only got $20 a month if they were a doctor.
Yeah.
They were like a professional. Like, that was the sad thing, is that you had these guys with, you had these surgeons driving cabs.
When you have people talking against, and they're talking about agreeing with communism or these dictatorships, they never been in these countries. I'm from Albania, so I know what communism is. I lived in Venezuela for a bit and in Cuba. So when you see that the people are great, of course they want to come over here because they want opportunities there. They're stagnated to being in complete poverty and control and not being human. So I understand it.
But that's what's fueling a lot of the migrant crisis now, with people coming from. I've been on the border in El Paso a lot, and a lot of the people who are coming over, they're coming from Nicaragua. They're coming from, it's not just Mexico. They're coming from Venezuela. They're coming from Cuba. All of the repressive regimes in that part of the world.
The problem with them coming, I don't have no problem. Is the people that are trying to come legally can no longer come in. And because of the way they're allowing to come in, they're being killed on the way in, they're being raped, they're being children are being separated, they're being trafficked. Our tax money is going to other countries and to them, and not to the citizens of this country that are homeless. And it's a terrible thing, the way that this is going on, because it's not humane. And I've said it over and over on different shows. We understand why they want to come in, and I don't blame them. But the way we're conducting it, and no vaccines, and these kids are all being allowed in schools, and I'm not even talking about COVID, any vaccine, diseases are going to run rampant with these children if they're not vaccinated before they go into the school systems. With the kids that are already living in America, they're going to send it back to their grandparents and parents, and you're going to see a lot of health problems in the future too. You can't let in 5 or 6 or 7 million people, and nobody knows their vaccine status. So,
I mean, not to mention that it's fueling the drug traffickers, the cartels who are charging people thousands of dollars.
my daughter's one of them that lost her life to fentanyl, so, and it's a big fight with me.
Oh, I'm sorry.
So thank you. It's been a year now, and because of that, the fentanyl is coming across the border. And again, where's the safety for our country, for our kids, for our school system, for the veterans that are sleeping on the street and orphans, the kids that are orphans already, 125,000 of them, and homeless people, 880,000 of them. So you can't kick out, as recently they just kicked out a housing project that was supposed to be for our inner city people, and they're putting in the immigrants, and the inner cities, well, see you later, go on the street and sleep. It's incredible that there is nothing being done properly.
It's a bit of a mess, yeah.
So how long did you spend in Medellin, you said, when you were covering
Pretty
Escobar?
much 4 years until so I was there from 91, off and on, because I covered all of Latin America from Rio de Janeiro, but I did spend a lot of time there over the 4 years that I was, 5 years. So 91 to 95 through 95, and Escobar dies in December of 94, I believe. I think it was 94. I may be getting it wrong, but I was there for all of that, like the crazy funeral. Like it was nuts. And I interviewed a lot of hitmen. Like I interviewed a lot of sicarios, and what I found was that he was preying on obviously these poor kids who didn't have a future, and so he would give them jobs, and some of them had left or tried to leave that world. And so the church groups and the human rights groups were helping them. And every time I interviewed one of them and asked them, these are kids who were 18 who killed like 17 people. And I'm like, why'd you do it? They said, well, I really wanted to buy my mother a fridge. Like that kind of stuff came out of their mouths, and you realize how poor they were. And then on the other hand, you had the police. So you had the police going into these shanty towns in Medellin, these comunas, and just killing people randomly. Like they were going after these sicarios, many of them who were trying to reform themselves. So I was often like going into these places where there was like that fight between the drug traffickers and the police, but the police were also indiscriminate in their violence. It was just...
When I was in Brazil in 2004 to almost 2007, those 3 years, and you probably covered some of this, where the police, there was hit squads going out and just killing kids in the street and saying they were gang members. And later on, one of the mayors did step up and try to stop it because they weren't gang members. They were just random kids that happened to be in the street that they were just killing at will because they were trying to kill as many of the gang members as they could. And they'd go out into the favelas. And so, I mean, it was disastrous there too. I was just so...
But it's wild how the government could control it when they wanted to, like during the Olympics and during every major world event that happened in Rio, you had a truce between the police and the people and the Red Command.
Yeah,
and
Command de Favela, I know
the people who controlled the trafficking in a lot of the favelas. Like it was always amazing to me how it just stopped, and they put the army on the street and everything was fine. But then afterwards, it just went back to the same fight between the drug traffickers and the police. And the sad thing about that was that you had, a lot of innocent people died. I once bought a house. It was my first house, and I wanted to see what it meant to own property in a shantytown. So I bought a house. It was like 2,000 Canadian, so like I don't know, 1,500 US at the time. And I thought, what do you have to go through? What kind of land registry do you go through in a place where there's no land registration? And it was actually quite fascinating. So I had a housekeeper, and she lived there, and then I set up a mortgage for her, and she ended up owning the house after a number of years. But it was really fascinating to be an actual slum landlord. I could call myself that.
Mariah Carey, I don't know if you're aware of this, bought property there, and there was no registry. It was fraud.
Oh,
She was
seriously?
buying, yeah, she was buying property. They were giving her the paperwork, and it was,
In Rio?
yeah.
Well, I actually had the paperwork in an unregistered place in a shantytown, and you know where it was? It was the biggest shantytown in Rio. What's it called? It's near Gavia and São Conrado. It's like Rocinha.
Okay.
So I bought it, and that shantytown is a city. There's like 200,000 people living there, and they've got their own banks, they've got their own radio stations, their own bus services. And I was just like fascinated that this community was safer than Rio de Janeiro itself, because you did anything wrong in that community, you raped somebody, you robbed somebody, you were dead, because the drug traffickers did not want the police coming in to investigate.
And how much was a property there?
Well, I paid $1,500. I had like a 2-bedroom house with a view of Rio. It was spectacular.
Brazil is a beautiful country. It's kind of like the way Malibu is, right? You're in the mountains, you're on the beach, you're in the city. You have everything there. It's a beautiful country. That's why you have so many people going there. The problem is the corruption, again, within the government itself. And it does have natural resources. So it's, and the economy is actually better in Argentina with less resources than Brazil has. But again, listen, where the power lies in governments is the usual, is the corruption of, and that's why I'm always talking, like, where's the mafia really at?
In the government, in Brazil for sure, because you're right. It's with the amount of natural resources that Brazil has. Everything from gold to diamonds to timber to
trees. It's incredible. The timber it's incredible.
Yeah.
You have the Amazonians. I mean, there's so much. I mean, it's incredible, a source of money there. Any kind of fruits is grown there is incredible. They get the food is great. Fish,
and they've got a growing season like all year round, as opposed to like only a few months in other countries.
I'm curious, so this is your 7th book now. What is your process for when you decide that you're gonna write a book, and then for this one specifically, where did the idea stem from?
So I had a friend of a friend who went to Yad Vashem in Jerusalem, which is the Holocaust Memorial, and they had seen trees planted for Ida and Louise Cook, who are the 2 sisters in my book. And he came back and said, I know nothing about these women. Like, what did they do? So I started looking into them and thinking that it'd be a couple of years research. It took 5 years of going through archives in Germany and Austria, Italy, England, Jerusalem, here. And it was just like, I really wanted to tell this story because, as I said earlier, they were ordinary, extraordinary heroines that had been lost to history. And what they did was, should be celebrated. And also what I loved about the story was the complexity of the hero, the favorite conductor of Adolf Hitler, who on the one hand is lobbying to get the Jewish apartments vacated by Jews in Munich for his opera stars after Jews were sent to concentration camps. He's actually writing letters to Martin Bormann, Hitler's secretary, that I found in the Munich archives. And he's doing that on the one hand. On the other hand, he's secretly plotting with these 2 women and his wife, who was a great soprano as well, to save these musicians. And so at the end of the war, he was never a member of the Nazi Party, but he is pilloried. He goes through denazification trial. He can't conduct again in Austria. So he suffers at the end. But it was just fascinating. I mean, when you look at World War II heroes like Oskar Schindler, who...
That's an incredible movie, too. Schindler's List, did you ever watch that? Oh, you got to watch it.
But Oskar Schindler was an entrepreneur who used slave labor, who used Jews as slave labor for but also saved them.
William Nelson plays in that.
But that's complex, right? Because he's getting an advantage out of using these poor people, but he's also saving them, and then he becomes a hero. But so the whole nature of heroism was something I really wanted to explore, and also the fact that these women were totally unglamorous, like they were, and that's how they got away with what they did. Nobody gave them a second look, right? When they brought the jewelry across the border, the guards aren't looking at them because they're just these crazy opera fans. And then after the war, when they tried to capitalize on their story, no one would buy their story because they weren't these glamorous women. So
this is to me, because I'm so fascinated with what happened with Nazi Germany and the Jews, and I'm Albanian, so in our culture, we try to protect. We're a small country. We were known to protect the Jews and try to bring them in.
A great history of protecting the Jews. Yeah.
So the Albanians, and I've always had that same. My grandfather was fascinated with, what people could possibly do to, like they did in Nazi Germany, and how it could still happen today, because you can still see the weakness in some people so easily influenced. And
well, it happened in the Balkans.
Yeah.
In 1992, yes.
Were you ever in touch with some of their descendants or family or?
They never married. They didn't have children. And I did speak to their great nephew, who said he didn't have anything of theirs left. But I found tons of letters. Like, they wrote fan letters to their opera stars. And I actually found a lot of letters in the New York Public Library in the Rosa Poncell papers. So Rosa Poncell was a great American soprano of the 1930s and 40s. And Ida Cook wrote her everything she ever did. And those letters were just at Lincoln Center at the library.
Wow.
So that was...
incredible. It's really, everybody should read this book, and I'll put it up again. But what's funny, you just said in 1990. So I still talk about, because being Albanian, I'm very outspoken about what happened, what Serbia did to the Kosovo people and Albanians. I'm at the cemeteries. I just was at the Serbian consulate's office again with a group of Albanians denouncing what happened. Just now, recently, there was another terrorist attack.
In Kosovo?
Yeah, in Kosovo, they killed a police officer, and 4 terrorists were killed. They gathered about 30 of them. But the problem I have is that when a country doesn't denounce them, people ask you, do you hate every person of that? You don't hate people by nationality. You don't hate them. And when you start seeing what happened to our families, our friends, our partners, and the genocide that went on, what I have the problem is, and why I'm so verbal about it, is they're not denouncing it. They're still trying to protect it. It's like what just went on in Canada with, how can an SS Nazi fighter stand up and get a standing ovation in 2023? So this is the problem. What I'm trying to understand human nature, no difference, and in a different way with our government officials that are selling out our country. And I keep talking about term limits. They get voted in, they should be able to do 2 terms, 3 terms, and out, because they're becoming too powerful and too many connections. You have lifelong guys like Mitch McConnell, that's sitting there, and his allegiance is not to the American people. It's to his pocket and the people that he's involved with. And you're giving him the authority of power for 60 and 70 years. What do you think they're going to do with it? Because they're unscathed. Nobody's going after them. You're one of few that are opening the eyes to everybody by just doing the article you just did just now. Because where do you start and stop with these government officials? Because I bet you can go to mostly any of them and start investigating them, and you'll look into so much corruption that's going on. The same way the government goes after the mafia and goes after Rico when they investigate each family, each crime family. There should be investigations on what's going on with all this money. The money's just disappearing.
Somebody I've worked with for many years, a researcher, said something really interesting, that politicians, it's not even the politicians anymore, that they're often held hostage to the lobbyists. Oh, yeah. And that's where all the money is exchanged. They're like robots of the lobbyists. And I think that that's a really ripe place to look for corruption.
Well,
as what goes on.
So they're passing, they're slother it all in one spot. And they're not contesting it, right? Because every bill is in one bill, and they're just getting pushed through. So that helps the lobbyists. But if you go each bill by bill, then there'll be exposure. But if you want a certain amount of money for whatever it is for the military, you bring that bill in front of the House and they vote on it and they pick that bill apart individually. At the way they're doing it now, they wait to the end of the year, they push it through these omnibus bills, and there's all kinds of junk within that bill and spending. That's incredible.
And if you're not paying attention.
Yeah, and they're not paying attention because they don't even have time enough to pay attention.
Right.
And that's the idea. That's why they're doing it like this. For people that don't understand it. And the winners are the lobbyists. They're getting filthy rich, and they're controlling each congressman in their districts. Whoever's got or not in their districts, whoever has the ear of those.
Yeah, that's why I never pay attention to, like, when opposition research firms contact me for stuff. I'm like, I can do better research than they do often. And no, I'm not saying that to brag, but I'm just saying you can't trust it because of where it's coming from. Yeah. And who knows how much money went into doing that. So,
well, Isabel, we appreciate you coming on.
Isabel, I could talk to you.
I know, and we're on.
I covered Kosovo.
A little.
Excuse me.
I covered Kosovo.
Yes, did you?
Yeah.
I'm there a lot.
98. I was there in 98. Sorry.
No, you're good. No, we're just on. I want to make sure that we're on your time constraint. But thank you so much for coming on. Reminder for Overture of Hope. Where can people buy it?
Amazon, everywhere books are sold.
Amazing. I look forward to reading it. We'll put the link probably to Amazon or one of those sites in the description of our video. Is there anything else you want to plug for people out there?
No, thank you very much for having me. I appreciate it.
Check out our article. Go online, check out our articles. Check out the last one on Senator Menendez. It was in the Post. It was 2 full pages, page 16 and 17. It's online. And check it out. It's very interesting. You check out the trial and keep looking for you. I know you'll be writing something.
I'll be continuing to write.
And for you guys that are watching us, we're going to have a very interesting show again on Epstein. One of his cellmates will be on. A journalist, Jacqueline Sweet, will be on. And we're also going to talk about several high-profile suicides, accidental deaths with the chefs of the White House. Campbell one and Schiff the other. One just died recently. Expert swimmers, and we're going to dive into, was it suicides, were they accidents, or were they murders?
Thank you, guys.
Thank you so much.